Dude,
I'm sorry.
quit screwing around. We got work to do. It's not funny. You're not funny. Like the mug. You're not funny. Your wife is going to kill me. Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Timmy, and this is, of course, Daniel, the one and only.
It's me.
It's him.
It's me.
Hey, so we launched a new series this week called Bystander, leading us into Easter, which is, the Super Bowl Sunday. When is Easter this year?
April 4th.
April 4th?
Yeah.
I want to say that's early.
It is.
It's a little early.
It's a little early.
Now, you may know this because you went to Bible college. How do you calculate Easter? Because it's always on a random day every year, it feels like.
It has to do with the lunar cycle. So it's like the first Sunday after the second blue moon in spring, after the equinox or something. I don't know.
Now, if you...
It's a lunar cycle.
If you're watching and you're like, hey, that's not exactly it, but...
No, it's not exactly it.
You can share what exactly Easter is calculated by.
Yeah.
And please don't hold us accountable as pastors for not knowing that, because it is a little bit weird the way it's calculated. I'm not sure I like it. It sounds a little pagan to me, going by moons and such. But we'll let the experts figure that out.
Yeah.
And we'll go with it because Easter's great.
Let's just unpack Sunday for now.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
So this series is going to be leading up to Easter. But for now, we got some time between now and then to kind of go over really John's account of Jesus, which is unique. And that kind of goes into my first question. How does John's account, you talked about this a little bit on Sunday, how does John's account compare to the other gospel writers?
Well, John really focuses on signs. He kind of forms his gospel, his account of Jesus around these 7 signs, something that we may call them miracles, but John very specifically refers to each event as a sign. John, there's a couple unique characteristics about the book of John. One of them is it's one of the other creation accounts in the Bible. So you got Genesis, right? It talks about the creation, but John starts off with the creation story as well, just real briefly, and includes Jesus in it. So it's a pretty cool book. It was also the latest, the latest written gospel. John was the oldest disciple. He lived the longest. He's the only disciple of Jesus to die of old age. He was the last one to be alive of those of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus. So he's kind of unique in that way. They tried to kill him once, and then they banished him to an island, and killing him didn't work, so they banished him, tried to silence him and get rid of him. But he still had some followers, and they encouraged him to, at least from what they can tell, Tertullian, actually the historian, kind of records that John's followers were urging him to write down his account of Jesus' life because he was there. So that's kind of a quick idea, but that's kind of what is different about John's gospel. Really is his focus on these, what he calls signs. We might think of them as just events, moments in time, but John's like, no, Jesus was doing these things not out of just random acts of kindness or random generosity, or Jesus wasn't doing these things just to show off, but he was pointing to something specific.
It was as if he had like a specific plan.
Yeah, it was almost like he was.
He had it mapped out a little bit because he does. I was just reading one of the Gospels. I guess it was John that I was just reading recently, and the death of Jesus, and Jesus does some things just. And it almost seems like they're kind of out of place and random, but he does those right before he dies. He says, "I'm thirsty," and then he says, "Okay, it's finished." And he was going and fulfilling different prophecies at different times, and they seem almost out of place and just well, why did Jesus do that? Why did he ride into town on a donkey?
Right.
Or the foal of a colt or whatever. It's like
in the last several hours of Jesus' life, he fulfills something like 350 prophecies from the Old Testament.
Wow.
Anywhere from, a few years prior to hundreds of years prior to Jesus. he fulfills. And the odds of that are there's some statisticians who have done calculations on the odds of that, and it is astronomically
Impossible.
low odds
Yeah.
and impossible for that to happen in that short amount of time. So,
but that's really cool, and especially the unique perspective that John gives. I would imagine it at his late age and making it as far as he did, he would have watched close friends and family martyred, killed,
yes,
imprisoned, tortured, and all this kind of stuff.
all of that.
And it kind of makes me think about, I talk to a lot of people just in ministry and in life that, are older, that seem like, and especially with my wife's line of work, just dealing with end of life stuff, we end up talking to a lot of people who are close to the end.
Yeah.
And what I hear a lot of times before the end is that, what else do I have to offer? Like, what else do I have here? I feel like I'm done. And I don't like that sentiment, just because it's like, hey, I feel like, this conversation is fruitful that we're even having. And
Not this one, but the one you're having with that person
right,
in that
exactly.
moment, right?
Yes. And so I'd like to think that, like, as long as you're here on earth, you still have something more to say. And I would imagine John writing his gospel, he's like, there's already been some great accounts. I mean, he probably saw Luke go through and, with Paul and write, Luke and Acts and his account. And he's like, well, how am I supposed to top that?
Right.
And then John, with his just unique perspective, especially being so close to Jesus, finally realizing towards the end of his life, like, hey, maybe the story can be written in a specific way with a specific goal to make people believe.
That's kind of cool, and that is his goal, and I think we should touch on that before we're done here today. But that is kind of cool perspective to think John had seen so much. He'd witnessed so much, not just firsthand with Jesus, but even from afar, watching the disciples be killed and be murdered and be tortured and imprisoned, like you said. And there was more years in between his account when he wrote it down and when the actual events happened. But there's also, in those years, a lot of perspective that's gained. I mean, I think anybody watching, we can look back at, what happened 10 years ago, and in a lot of ways, hindsight's 20/20. You look back and you look at that situation, and you see things. In a lot of ways, you see things really clearly. You're like, man, look how God worked. Look at how all this stuff lines up. And if you imagine, I mean, John had years of reflecting and going, oh my goodness, look at what. And so it's kind of cool to have some accounts of Jesus' life that were recorded much closer to the actual events, and then also have this account that is kind of peppered with more perspective and more life experience. Coming from John, who seemingly, from all gospel accounts, was maybe Jesus' closest friend. So kind of cool thought process there. And I also love that you brought up, I think it's so important for people who are more seasoned in life to recognize, because I agree with you 100%, that if you're still breathing, if you're still here, God still has something to accomplish in you and something to accomplish through you. And for young guys like Timmy and I, we need your wisdom, we need your perspective, we need that life experience poured into us. I think you would agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
I learned so much from people who have seen way more than me. And I gained this perspective, actually, my last birthday in November. I've talked to you about it and a few other people. I turned 34.
That's old.
I know. And I thought about it. You're going to be 34.
Yeah, that's true.
But I thought about it. I could live another 34 years, a whole nother lifetime, and I will still be 2 years younger than my dad is right now.
Wow.
There's so much life left to live for so many of us.
Right.
And I have a lot to learn, but there's people around us right now who have lived that extra 34 years, and we could gain wisdom from them. So
Yeah, it's really cool. I don't know if I shared this on the show before, but I know I've shared it with you and our staff. I think it was this last summer or maybe last spring. My wife had a friend pass away who was in his mid-90s, and it was someone that she had done a project on in college in her undergrad. It's like an elderly couple that lived in North Portland, and we got to know them. They came to our wedding, and we kind of visited with them a couple times a year. And I wasn't very close to them, but towards the end, I did show up, and I'm not comfortable around death at all. And he was a believer, and he was just like, hey, take me home, Jesus. And it was really interesting to see. And my wife's just talking to him about like, it's going to be so exciting. They're just talking about heaven. And I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable, but he's just loving it. And, but he kind of did. He's like, I don't have anything left to offer. I'm in pain. I want out, kind of thing. And, I'm an avid mushroom hunter, and so I had picked up some mushrooms, and I found out that he really liked mushrooms. So I made them a mushroom dish and sent it to him, some soup. And my wife delivered it, and I wasn't there. And it was when I was struggling a little bit with just some difficult things at youth, and he just said, this mushroom soup is so good, through my wife, and told her like, hey, this is delicious. And she's like, yeah, my husband just wanted to make it for you. And he told her, and this was the day before he died, and he said, wow. Tell Timmy that God doesn't always give you what you want when you want it, but he's going to give you exactly what you need when you need it. And
wow,
for him to lay that truth on me, literally on his deathbed, and to think that, hey, you don't have anything to offer. Are you kidding me? Like, from someone, on their deathbed to say something like that to me, which was so incredibly timely. Right. At a time when I was just struggling, just trusting and finding hope. Yeah. And for him to just give me that, before he goes, it's just like, wow. To impact really me and my ministry, just right there. And I just, that'll always stick with me. And
it's incredible, just like our lives echo through time in ways we don't know. Who knows what John was thinking when he wrote all this stuff down? He didn't know he was writing the Bible. He didn't know that this was going to be something that we all had the opportunity to learn from thousands of years later, through incredible efforts by hundreds, if not thousands of people to preserve it, to keep it from being destroyed, to reprint it illegally and make sure that it gets in the hands of people all over the world. And now we get to see the intentionality of Jesus' life, and not just his life, but the things that he did and the things that he said. And because of John and Matthew and Peter and Mark and Luke and dozens of other people during that time, just incredible for us to catch a glimpse of what those men saw, heard, and experienced.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Powerful.
Yeah, just to think John, like you said, he didn't know that he was writing the Bible when he was writing it. And then he would, at one point pen the words, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only begotten son, that for whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. And it goes on to 17, like he's writing those words, probably not thinking, it's a huge truth. But like realizing the impact that it would have 2,000 years later is like, the most famous verse ever. And people having, John 3:16 tattoos, holding up John 3:16 signs, all that kind of stuff. Stone Cold Steve Austin, I think, played into that in the WWF, all that. So it's pretty cool. And I did touch on this earlier. I want to get to this, but what was the purpose of John writing the Gospel of John?
So it's interesting. He kind of gives his thesis or the filter or the purpose of him writing towards the end, and it's actually cool. You can see it reflected in the beginning too. Mike and I were talking about that yesterday. Just how even the first chapter and the last chapter kind of, you could swap them and the book would mean the same thing. But John in chapter 20, verse 30 and 31 talks about the purpose of the book, which is, I write all of these things down. There are more signs that Jesus performed than are recorded here in my account. There's plenty of more. But I write these so that you,
the reader.
I am at the reader, so that you may believe, and that through believing that Jesus is the Messiah, that you would have life in his name. John's entire purpose is to show us that there are events that happened that were more than events, they were actually signs, and that those signs serve as evidence so that we can believe. And when belief begins, we can that transitions into trusting God, trusting Jesus for our future and for to give us maybe not what we want, like you said, but absolutely to provide exactly what we need when we need it.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so that's kind of the process that the book walks us through, that the account walks us through. That's kind of it seems like the process the disciples were walking through over and over and over again. Hey, there's another sign that's evidence that Jesus is in fact who he says he is, and that we can believe in him, and the more that we believe, the greater we can trust. And so it's a huge deal. John wrote it down so that we may believe.
Yeah.
Not so that we can have a historical account, although that's powerful. The historical account serves a greater purpose, which is us today believing.
Absolutely, and just even the testimony that John would still believe after all those years, and seeing all that stuff happen, and the destruction of the temple, and being you mentioned something that they tried to kill him. Yeah, I can't imagine having yourself being tried to kill would be a good experience.
They tried to boil him alive, and it didn't work.
Oh my gosh!
Whatever that, I don't even. Yeah.
That seems horrible.
So they're like, well, he won't die. Let's put him over on that island over there. It's like a crab.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a bad way to go. And he didn't go, so that's maybe even worse. So
it might be worse.
And after all that, seeing his friends die and all this stuff, I mean, the world literally fall apart, and he didn't get to see.
And him going, no, I because of what I saw, because of what I experienced, because of what I witnessed, my belief and my trust and my faith is greater than my circumstances right now. Because of what I saw. And so he wrote it down, and now we get to believe based on what we've heard from the people who saw it and experienced it.
Sure, that's so good.
So
I want to touch on this before we end. We talked about the miracle, the wedding feast at Cana.
Yep.
And why do you think Jesus chose that as his first sign or his first miracle? Why was it the wedding feast?
I think that's an interesting question, because in some ways when you read the text, when you read the account, it's almost like Mom, Mary, chose that, because she's like, hey, Jesus, do something about this. And he even looks at her and goes, hey, it's not my time yet. And it's interesting too, because the miracle, the sign, is not a public one. It's something that happens kind of in the background. And I was talking with my wife, Brandy, a little bit about it. And she goes, isn't it interesting that Jesus' first miracle is done, that the people who really actually witness the actual miracle are the servants, not the priests, not the elect, not the highest class, but what we could assume was maybe more like the lowest class of people saw it first. Because the highest people at the wedding, the most prominent people at the wedding, they didn't know. They just thought, the master of the ceremony saved the best wine for last. No one knew it got changed into water.
Right.
Or that water got changed into wine, and that Jesus did it. But also, it's pretty amazing when you look at what he uses to accomplish this miracle. He tells the servants, fill up the jars that are used for ceremonial cleansing, that are used for the sacrificial temple system. They're used to cleanse people of their sin. Jesus says, use those. And he says, fill them with water, which is what they're normally filled with. And then he changes the water, which is the content or the substance used to wash away sins. He changes that water to wine, which now we recognize is a symbol of blood. And then he goes and he spills his own blood to cleanse us of our sins, not temporarily like the old system, but permanently based on the new system that Jesus came to set up. It's very intentional. Yeah. It's very specific. And it is pointed directly at the power that comes through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection when it's applied to our sin. And it's pointed directly at the old system and saying what was meant to be temporary is completed in me and made permanent through the spilling of blood one time, not all the time. The sacrificial system is complete and fulfilled in Jesus' once and for all sacrifice. So, I mean, there's even more there, but it is very obvious when you really look at, when you start to dig into the story, that this is more than just a miracle. It's more than just like pleasing his mom and getting his mom off his back. It's very, very specific, pointed in a very meaningful direction.
Right. And I think one of the biggest keys is that it seems random and it seems like weird, but there was so much intentionality with it. In fact, I was reading up on it. There's this book, probably my favorite book that I've read in the last couple of years, called Encounters by Timothy Keller. And he goes through, and I think he actually uses the Gospel of John and goes through just encounters that people had with Jesus and what they looked like. And he talks a lot about the wedding feast early on and what that meant. And he talks about how Jesus was trying to prove too that what he came on earth to accomplish was to bring joy. And that's why it had to do with a wedding and a big, week-long feast or whatever it was, because it wasn't just like an evening. Like this was a day after day after day
it was
ceremony.
3 days or more.
Right. So it was like something like a huge event, and talking about how he came to bring joy, and also that
so cool.
That the first miracle that he wanted it to look like, I guess what would be his first miracle or his first event when we go to heaven, like that it would be the wedding feast, that he's actually the true master of the feast himself, and that someday in heaven when Jesus comes back, we're all going to have like a huge feast that is like that eternal joy. And
that's so good.
He's going to rock the party. So.
Jesus is always painting a picture of what could be and should be all the time. So that's beautiful. Yeah. You should have preached.
Someday. Someday. So if you guys want to check out that book, it's called Encounters by Timothy Keller. Great book. Great book. Highly recommend that. So
awesome.
Well, Daniel, we are out of time today, but we're going to be back at it next week with some more awesome John.
Actually, Mike's going to be in the seat next week. He's preaching this Sunday. So week 2 of Bystander.
All right.
So stay tuned.
Look forward to that. So have a great week, guys. Love you.